They walked in with nothing but hope in their hearts. A hope that tonight, for once, they would be treated as equals. A family of 4, father, mother, and 2 children, all dressed in their Sunday best. Their smiles glowed with the kind of joy that comes only from hard-earned victories. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone. But what they didn't know was that this night would turn into a test of their dignity, their patience, and their worth as human beings. The moment their feet crossed the polished marble floor of La Maison d'Or, a restaurant that prided itself on excellence, every conversation seemed to pause. Forks froze mid-air, eyes cut across the room with suspicion, disgust, and silent judgment. The father, Marcus Johnson, squeezed his wife's hand gently, a subtle reassurance. His daughter, only 10 years old, clung to her mother's arm, her innocent eyes scanning the room, confused by the sudden shift in energy. And his teenage son, Jamal, stood tall, trying to hide his discomfort, pretending not to notice the whispers. They had faced stares before. They had been made to feel out of place before. But tonight was different. Tonight, they belonged here. They had every right to be here. Still, when the restaurant manager approached them, tall, thin, with a face carved into a permanent sneer, Marcus knew trouble was brewing. "Can I help you?" the manager asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm, as though their very presence was an inconvenience. Marcus smiled politely. "Yes, we have a reservation. Johnson, table for 4. The manager flipped through his little leather-bound book, not even pretending to check properly. After a few seconds, he looked up, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "I'm sorry, I don't see your name here. Perhaps you've mistaken this place for another restaurant." His words cut sharp, his tone mocking. The mother, Angela, straightened her shoulders. "No mistake. I confirmed the reservation myself 2 days ago." But the manager didn't even look at her. His eyes lingered at Marcus, narrowing with the weight of prejudice. And then with a sharp inhale, he declared, "Unfortunately, we are full tonight. You'll have to leave." The words fell like a hammer, echoing through the silence of the dining room. Customers turned their heads, some smirking, others pretending not to notice. Marcus's son clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "Dad," he whispered. Marcus put a calming hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady, though his pride was bleeding. "We have a reservation. Please, check again." But the manager leaned in closer, lowering his voice, his mask of professionalism slipping just enough to reveal the poison underneath. "This establishment has standards. We don't just let anyone in." Angela gasped. Her daughter's eyes welled up with tears. Marcus felt fire building in his chest, but he swallowed it down. Years of being underestimated, years of holding back anger in the face of injustice had taught him one thing. Patience was power. So he smiled, calm, composed. But behind his calm eyes was a storm that no one in that restaurant could see coming. The family turned to leave, their humiliation complete. But as they walked out, Marcus glanced back one last time at the chandeliered ceiling, the polished floors, the faces that thought they were better than him. And he whispered under his breath, so only his wife could hear, "They don't know. They're about to meet their new owners." The story you're about to hear is not just about a family denied service. It's not just about racism, pride, or power. This is about tables turning, about a truth so powerful that it shattered arrogance in one single moment. Because sometimes those who look down on you will one day be forced to look up to you. To understand why this night mattered so much, you have to know who the Johnsons were and why they chose this restaurant of all places for their family celebration. Marcus Johnson wasn't born into wealth. He was born into struggle. Raised in a one-bedroom apartment on the South Side, the son of a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. As a child, Marcus had tasted humiliation more times than most men could count. Teachers who doubted him, store clerks who followed him, police officers who looked at him as though he was guilty of existing. But instead of breaking him, each cut made him stronger. Angela, his wife, was no stranger to the same pain. She had grown up hearing whispers that she was too ambitious, that she should know her place. But she refused to bow her head. She studied hard, built her career brick by brick, and carried herself with a grace that turned heads and silenced doubters. Together, Marcus and Angela were a storm disguised as calm seas. They had built everything they owned from nothing. A small business that grew, then another, until finally they had the means to invest in something bigger. And their children, Jamal and little Nia, they were the reason the Johnsons worked so hard. Every sacrifice, every late night, every battle against prejudice was so their children wouldn't have to carry the same scars. Now, let's talk about the restaurant. La Maison d'Or. To some, it was the crown jewel of the city. A place where politicians dined, where executives closed million-dollar deals, where celebrities came to be seen. But to many black families in the community, it was a reminder of doors that were shut in their faces, a reminder of whispered words like exclusive and private that really meant not for you. There were stories of reservations mysteriously disappearing, of wait times that stretched endlessly for some but not for others, of service that turned cold the moment a black customer walked in. It wasn't new, it wasn't even subtle, but it was protected by wealth, by prestige, and by silence. So why would Marcus bring his family here? Because sometimes the sweetest victory comes from walking boldly into the very place that tried to shut you out, and proving that you belong. This night wasn't just a family dinner. It was a statement. And when the manager humiliated them, when he sneered in their faces and told them to leave, Marcus felt the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. He remembered his mother denied service in a diner decades ago. He remembered his uncle turned away from a job because of the color of his skin. He remembered his own son, Jamal, coming home one day from school with tears in his eyes, saying a teacher had told him, "Boys like you don't make it far." And now, here they were again, history repeating itself. But this time, Marcus wasn't a powerless boy. This time, Marcus held the power of ownership. Because just 2 weeks earlier, while the manager bragged about his exclusive clientele, the restaurant had quietly changed hands. The old owner, buried in debt and desperate for a way out, sold his pride and joy to the highest bidder. And that bidder was Marcus Johnson. The paperwork was signed, the ink was dry. The Johnson family weren't just guests tonight. They were the rightful owners of La Maison d'Or. But the manager didn't know. The staff didn't know. And the customers most certainly did not know. So when he sneered at Marcus and told him, "We don't just let anyone in," he had no idea that the man he was humiliating was now the man who could decide his future with a single word. The irony of prejudice is that those who wield it often swing blindly, never realizing who they're striking. The Johnsons could have revealed the truth right then, in front of everyone, but they didn't, because patience is power. And sometimes the most devastating justice is delivered at the perfect moment. The Johnsons could have walked away quietly. They could have swallowed the insult, gotten in their car, and left with their dignity battered but intact. But something about the way the manager stood there, smug, unshaken, proud of the humiliation he had just delivered, made it impossible to leave.
Marcus turned back, calm, controlled. "Sir," he said firmly, "we confirmed this reservation 2 days ago. My family deserves to be treated with the same respect as any other guests in this room." For a brief second, the manager's eyes flickered with surprise, not because Marcus spoke up, but because Marcus dared to demand respect. And then his face hardened. "Look," the manager said, his voice now louder, his words sharp enough to slice the air. "This restaurant is full. I don't care what you think you booked. We don't have a table for you." Angela stepped forward, her voice clear but trembling with indignation. "You're lying. There are empty tables right there." The manager sneered. "Those are reserved for our regular,
Not for walk-ins. Walk-ins? Jamal's voice cracked with anger. "We told you we have a reservation!" But the manager had already turned his back, dismissing them like trash swept to the curb. The room had gone silent. Other diners watched, some with open curiosity, others with discomfort. A few shook their heads, whispering, "Disgraceful." But no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. Because in moments like this, silence becomes complicity. Nia, the youngest, tugged at her mother's sleeve, her little voice breaking the silence. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" Angela's heart shattered. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the world doesn't see who you are? It only sees what it wants to see. She knelt down, her voice soft but strong. "No, baby, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people just don't understand." But Jamal wasn't satisfied with that answer. His chest heaved with rage. He was tired of holding back, tired of swallowing pain that wasn't his fault. "Dad," he hissed under his breath, "why are we letting him talk to us like this? Why don't we—" Marcus put a hand on his shoulder again, steady, grounding. "Because," he whispered, his eyes locked on the manager, "the best revenge is patience." But the manager wasn't done. Not content with simply denying them service, he decided to make an example out of them. His voice carried across the restaurant now, his arrogance on full display. "As I said, we don't have space tonight. We run an establishment with standards. If you're looking for a meal, I suggest you try somewhere more suitable." The words hit like bullets. Suitable. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Jamal's fists clenched, Angela's eyes filled with tears. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his face remained calm, unreadable. The humiliation was complete. The Johnson family, dressed in their best, prepared for celebration, stood rejected in front of an entire room of strangers. But what the manager didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the stage was being set. Every insult, every sneer, every word dripping with prejudice was stacking weight on a scale. And when the truth finally came crashing down, the weight of that arrogance would destroy him. Marcus took his wife's hand. He looked at his children, their young faces etched in pain, and he made a choice. He turned to leave. But not in defeat, but in patience. Because he knew justice delayed is not justice denied. And so as the Johnsons walked out of La Maison d'Or, heads held high despite the humiliation, the diners went back to their meals.
Some shook their heads, whispering about discrimination. Others pretended nothing happened. But no one in that restaurant could have predicted that within days, the very family they scorned would return. Not as guests, but as the rightful owners. And when they did, the tables would turn. The drive home was silent. The city lights blurred against the car windows, but inside the Johnsons' vehicle, the air was heavy with unspoken words. Angela stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. She hadn't cried in front of the manager. She hadn't let him see her break. But now, her eyes glistened, tears fighting to escape. Beside her, Marcus sat calm, but his calm was the kind that only came from holding back fire. A storm churned inside him, threatening to spill over, but he refused to let it consume him. In the back seat, Jamal fumed. His teenage pride had been wounded, his faith in fairness tested. He had always looked up to his father as a man who stood tall, unshaken by the world's cruelty. But tonight, he didn't understand his father's silence. "Dad, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell him who we are, that we own that place?" Nia flinched at the sharpness in his brother's tone. Angela reached back, trying to calm him, but Marcus raised his hand gently. "Let him speak," he said. Jamal leaned forward with his fists clenched. "He humiliated us. He looked at us like we were nothing, and you just let him. We could have shut him down right there." Marcus finally turned, his gaze steady on his son. His voice was low, but carried the weight of years of lessons. "Son, sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemy think they've won the battle." Jamal blinked, frustrated. "I don't get it." "You will," Marcus said softly. "Patience, timing, that's how real justice hits hardest." Back at home, the family gathered around the dining table. The same table where they'd shared laughter, struggles, and dreams. But tonight, the air was different. Angela spread the paperwork across the table. Contracts, deeds, legal documents, all stamped, signed, sealed. There it was, in black and white. The Johnsons were the official owners of La Maison d'Or. Angela's voice trembled as she looked at the papers. "We worked so hard for this, and to think, our first night there, we were treated like criminals." Marcus took her hand. "That's why this moment matters even more. We don't just own a restaurant, Angela. We own a symbol, a place that's been used to shut people like us out. Now, we decide what it stands for." Angela nodded, her tears finally falling, not of sorrow, but of pride. Meanwhile, across town, the manager of La Maison d'Or sat in his office recounting the evening's events with smug satisfaction. To him, it was just another night, another family put in their place. He poured himself a glass of wine, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. These people think money buys class, but class is something they'll never have. Arrogance dripped from every word. He didn't know that the ground beneath his feet had already shifted. He didn't know the power he thought he wielded was gone. The papers had already been signed. His position, his authority, his pride, all hanging by a thread. And soon, that thread would snap. Over the next few days, Marcus and Angela quietly prepared. They spoke with their attorney. They finalized financial transitions. They even met with the former owner, who congratulated him warmly, eager to wash his hands of the failing business. And with each step, Marcus's patience grew stronger. He wasn't just planning to reveal the truth. He was planning to transform the restaurant from a place of exclusion into a place of welcome. Because true power isn't just about proving someone wrong. It's about changing the narrative, changing the game entirely. And so as the manager carried on with his arrogance, sneering at certain customers, dismissing staff who questioned him, strutting across the floor like a king in his palace, he had no idea that the kingdom he thought he ruled no longer belonged to him. The Johnsons waited, and when the moment was right, they would return. Not as humiliated guests, but as the owners who held his future in their hands. 3 nights later, the Johnsons returned. This time, they didn't come quietly. Marcus wore his finest suit, sharp, tailored, commanding. Angela's dress shimmered under the streetlights, elegance wrapped in dignity. Jamal stood tall, determination etched in his young face. And little Naya clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide, but fearless. They stepped out of their car and walked toward La Maison d'Or with purpose. This was no longer a dinner outing. This was a reckoning. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with its usual chatter, laughter clinking against glasses, forks tapping against porcelain plates. To the diners, it was just another night of luxury. To the Johnsons, it was justice waiting to unfold. The moment the Johnsons entered, the air shifted again. The same stares, the same whispers. And then, him, the manager. He spotted them immediately, his face tightening into a scowl. He marched across the floor, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. "Well," he sneered, folding his arms. "Back again? Didn't I make myself clear last time? We don't have room for outsiders." His voice carried across the room. Diners turned to look. A hush settled. Angela's chin lifted. Jamal clenched his jaw. Marcus simply stood tall, his expression unreadable. Marcus said, "Check your book. Reservation. Johnson. Table for 4. The manager let out a short, mocking laugh. "Ha! I don't need to check. I already told you. This establishment caters to a certain class of people. I won't waste my time pretending you belong here." Once again, the humiliation unfolded in public. Once again, the Johnsons were treated like intruders in a space they rightfully deserved. But this time, Marcus's calm wasn't silence. It was control. Because now, the stage was set. Angela stepped forward, her voice clear, cutting through the tension. "You know," she said, "it's funny how you keep calling us outsiders." The manager smirked. "Well, if the shoe fits." "But the thing about shoes," Marcus interrupted, his tone firm, "is that sometimes they end up on the other foot." The manager blinked, confused, annoyed. "What are you talking about?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a crisp envelope. He held it calmly, deliberately.
"You might want to take a closer look at this," Marcus said, handing it to him. The manager snatched it, scoffing. "What is this? A complaint letter? A desperate attempt to be taken seriously?" But as his eyes scanned the papers inside, the smirk slid off his face. The color drained from his cheeks. His lips parted, but no sound came out. It was the ownership contract, stamped, signed, irrefutable. The Johnson family were the legal owners of La Maison d'Or. The silence that followed was deafening. Every diner watched as the man who had just humiliated a family was now humiliated himself. Angela folded her arms. Jamal's eyes burned with satisfaction. Even little Naya tilted her head, her innocent voice breaking the stillness. "Does this mean he works for us now?" Gasps rippled across the room. Some diners covered their mouths. Others chuckled under their breath. The manager staggered, his arrogance crumbling into dust. This must be some kind of mistake. It can't be." "Oh, it's no mistake," Marcus said firmly. "As of last week, this restaurant belongs to the Johnson family, which means you, sir, are no longer speaking to customers you can dismiss. You're speaking to the very people who sign your paycheck." A murmur swept across the dining room, gasps, whispers, even a few claps. Angela stepped forward, her eyes locked on the manager. "We came here to celebrate, to show our children what dignity looks like, and you tried to humiliate us, not once, but twice. You didn't just insult us as people, you insulted the very owners of this establishment." Her words hit like thunder. The manager stammered, his arrogance unraveling into desperation. I didn't know. If I had known—" "That's the problem," Angela cut in, her voice like steel. "You shouldn't have to know someone's title, or their wealth, or their power, to treat them with basic human decency. Respect should never depend on who you think is important." The diners nodded. Some whispered, "She's right." Others shook their heads in shame at their own silence earlier. Marcus turned to his son. "Jamal, you asked me why I didn't say anything the other night, why I stayed calm when he humiliated us." He gestured to the trembling manager. This is why. Sometimes the greatest justice isn't in shouting or fighting back in anger. Sometimes it's in patience, because patience reveals truth. And tonight, the truth revealed itself. Jamal's eyes widened. For the first time he understood. His father hadn't been weak. He had been wise. The manager dropped to his knees, the papers slipping from his hands. Please, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, I didn't mean any harm. It was a misunderstanding, a mistake. Give me another chance." But Marcus didn't move. His gaze was steady, filled not with rage, but with resolve. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You looked at us, and you decided we didn't belong. That wasn't ignorance. That was arrogance. Angela's voice softened, but carried power. We don't run businesses on arrogance. We run them on respect, on dignity, on fairness. She turned to the diners, her voice rising with conviction. This restaurant will no longer be a place of exclusion. It will no longer be a place where people are judged by the color of their skin, or the clothes on their back, or the money in their pocket. From this day forward, La Maison d'Or will be a place of welcome, a place where everyone is treated with respect. Applause erupted. Diners rose to their feet.
Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded, moved by the power of her words. As for the manager, Marcus picked up the papers from the floor and tucked them neatly back into the envelope. "You're finished here," he said simply. "Pack your things. Tonight is your last night at La Maison d'Or." The man's knees buckled. He tried to protest, but the sound of applause drowned his voice. His reign of arrogance was over, and in his place, dignity had reclaimed its throne. Because in the end, true power doesn't come from belittling others. It comes from lifting them up. And justice, when it arrives, does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the fall of a man who thought he was untouchable, and rises in the quiet triumph of those he tried to cast aside. The restaurant refused to serve them, but in the end, it was the world that refused to serve him. And that is justice.